Hopefully you all had a nice break reading or skiing. Was there any skiing? No? Reading, hanging out. I went to California to talk to them about their drought, and it was kind of funny because some people think there's a drought and the water managers don't think there's a drought. So if you want to keep track of this issue, just remember right now, today in February, I said there's a drought and there's not as much water as usual, and they're not really doing a lot about it, and they're talking about it, but they're not doing a lot about it, and because they're not doing a lot about it, water as a resource might end up being scarce or depleted to the point of being in the newspaper in terms of emergency. If the drought in California and the West continues until the next year, it's going to be even more dramatic. The most likely consequence this year of the drought is that, can you finish? The most likely consequence of the drought is that food prices are going to go up. That may not affect you because the cost of most food is transportation and advertising. It's not necessarily the cost of the raw material. A box of cornflakes or cereal has about 20 cents of raw ingredients and $4 of advertising. So we'll find out what happens, but just if you're interested, keep an eye on that. The briefings were interesting to me. I wasn't actually intending to check for plagiarism. And I ended up doing that because this Grammarly service, which some of you actually emailed me about because you were doing your own checkings for plagiarism, Grammarly said, oh, have a free trial. I said, oh, I'll just copy paste. And then lo and behold, almost 30% of the students in the class, obviously not you because the people who are not here are those 30%, were copying and pasting information off the internet and claiming that it is as your own. There's no cultural issue here, although some professors told me there will be some kind of cultural issue. If I say, if I write in an essay, the dog jumped over the cow, or even something more American, 4 score and 7 years ago, and I don't put it in quotes because I say I wrote this myself out of my own intuition, then I am stealing somebody else's words. I don't know why that would be a complicated issue, although apparently it is. I do know that I did not require that you provide references. That's not an issue. References is not the same as plagiarism, okay? And the people who were caught are losing 5 points. That means their course grade, of course, is 5 points lower. If that happens again, I will fail them, and I'll report them to the dean. Those of you on tape listening to this, those of you who are not listening to this, whatever, they'll fail anyway, right? So those of you who put an effort into the briefing and used your own words and read Wikipedia and read the Enbridge Pipeline Pro Coalition and read the newspaper and said, oh, given that I've read this, I'm going to write down these words, you did the right thing. Okay? That's the idea. So, and it's very difficult for native English speakers, let alone non-native speakers, to write. I know that. I've been writing for a long time. It's a real pain. The point of writing is so that you practice and get better. All of you should know that because you're students. Some people who are trying to take a shortcut and say, oh, I'll copy-paste the assignment and that will show how smart I am, those people are dumb. Because on the midterm and the final, they'll fail. Please don't sit in the back row. Is that enough about plagiarism? I'm tired of it. And as an extension, I think all of you probably submitted your peer grading of the briefings by this morning online. Hossein and I will work on getting those sorted out, the grades entered, and then here's the thing that's going to happen by Thursday, which means in 2 days. We're going to send, believe it or not, the peer grading of your briefing to you, and then you're just going to rank them good, better, best. You don't do any writing. You just say this one is the most helpful, this one is the least helpful, and this is the middle helpful. Okay? I realize that it's a slightly painful process to go from this to that to the other, but that almost is what happens all the time when you write essays, right? You submit your essay, your professor is going to write some comments, and now you get to grade the professor, except it's not me, right? You're going to grade each other. And the people who put a lot of effort into giving constructive advice and how to improve the briefing and so on, they should be getting a good grade back from you, all right? I already mentioned in the syllabus, and it's relevant here, you might think, oh, somebody gave me an A, I'll give them an A back because I love you too. You can do that if you want to, but it's probably better to give a good grade back to someone who tried to help you, right? Even if they gave you a C. The most helpful feedback usually I've ever had is someone who totally brutalized my work, and yet it helped me. I'm editing my book right now. Some guy said, I don't think this makes sense. I spent 2 hours deleting all the references to that in my book because he was right. And you could say, oh, I disagree with you because everything I say is right, but then you never learn anything, do you? Right? The whole point of doing this is so that you can learn from each other. And I think also as writers, you will see, I wrote this, and 3 other people wrote a variation of this. Hopefully you'll see from what they wrote how to improve your own writing. Did anybody notice that when you were reading the briefings? Any hands here? Anybody notice that? You can raise your hands, but did anybody notice that? Did it help you on your own? See something in your, oh my God, I missed that. Shit, I'm going to get a bad grade now, right? Or, they said this in a different way, or I don't agree with them, is obviously an important question in the briefing. It's okay to not agree with them. Your job is to follow through on what they're trying to say and help them improve their argument, including you're wrong, but also including I learned something from you. Okay? You already handed all this in. The reason I'm telling you now is because we're going to do another briefing later on. So you'll get a chance to do this all over again, and we'll do all the same stuff with the online stuff and the ranking and so on. Please don't sit in the back row. Can you in the back row, you're designated back row police right now. And you're designated back row police. No, the girl behind you. All right? All right. So, any questions on the briefing, the peer grading of the briefing, the feedback on the peer grading on the briefing? Any questions on that? Yeah.
If we don't feel like we were marked fairly, do we talk to you after? Or?
It's almost irrelevant, because if you were marked unfairly, oh, this is a very good question, though, you bring up. Oh my God, I got to see, I wrote this amazing briefing, right? But then you don't know who the other 2 briefings are you were being judged against. The fact is, the person who had to grade you, if they actually said, this is an A and this is a B and this is a C, it's still an A, B, and C. If you say, I have a C, I deserve an A, well, then someone who has the A is going to get your C, right? Well, you guys should negotiate in the hallway, right? So the good news is, the bad news is maybe you got a grade that you don't feel you deserve. The good news is you don't even know what you deserve because you're just being ranked relative to somebody else. And the person who ranked you might have been lazy, they might have been diligent, they might have liked your opinion, they might not have liked your opinion. They might have thought you plagiarized, maybe you didn't. Maybe you wrote about the Enbridge pipeline even though I said don't write about pipelines in particular, okay? So people were graded for all different reasons. The whole goal of actually having your briefing graded by 3 different people is that on average, they're right. Yeah? So if you get a B, B, and a B from 3 people who don't know you and we're also looking at 6 other briefings, then maybe a B is actually more or less a fair grade. If you get an A, B, and C, then you've got some noise there, but guess what? You get a B, right? On average. Yeah?
What if we get back up with plagiarized papers? Because they're going to be punished, but we also will be punished because plagiarized papers will look better than and considering they're
yes.
People that plagiarize.
Yeah, so this is a tricky question. I did not find an entire, the worst percentage of plagiarizing is about 30%. So some people were copying like 6 or 8 sentences out of the whole thing. And that may have made them look good in terms of, wow, really brilliant, sentences, complete sentences from the advertising arm of Kinder Morgan or whatever, right? Because those people get paid a lot of money to write very nice sentences. But on the other hand, the person who was copying and pasting didn't know what they were talking about. So the likely story is they would paste them in the wrong order or they wouldn't make any point. And I'm guessing, I've seen some of these essays and it's like, well, that's really nice, but you have no context. You're not explaining anything. You're not even answering the briefing, right? So copying and pasting, beautiful sentences from somewhere else doesn't necessarily show that you understand the idea. And it's harder for people that are doing that because they weren't even taking the time to understand what they were doing. So I'm hoping, this is your question, I'm hoping that the feedback is not just that they get a -5 for plagiarizing, but that they get a lower rank because it's not so good. But even if they get an A, they're still all the way down below a C. Because a C is 6 points on this assignment, right? So if you wrote the best one and you got A, but you plagiarized, you only get 5 points anyway. So they can't win. If they get C's, then they get 1 point.
I'm more worried about mine because they get A, I don't get B.
Oh, no. Don't worry about that. No. So look, so there's going to be 85 briefings. There's 250 or so grades, right? And they're all going to be distributed, a third A, a third B, and a third C. You're worried, am I going to get a lower grade because maybe my briefing was with 2 plagiarized briefings, something like that? Okay. On the one hand, it might be true that you would be given a C because the person reading it, in fact, 3 people reading your essay, and they had 6 plagiarized perfect essays next to them would give you 3 C's in a row. I'm assuming you're an A writer, obviously. Okay. So if you had such a bad statistical draw, right, your essay is always against 2 brilliant plagiarized essays, then you're going to get a C. On the other hand, all of those plagiarized essays are going to lose points in the class distribution. So in the curve, you're okay. Okay. But that's unlikely. If you get an A, B, and C, then you're back to a B, and they get knocked off, and so on. Right? I don't worry too much about the specifics. I hate to say it. Worry more about the learning. And the next time this happens, the plagiarism will be lower, hopefully, because of the threat of getting a failing grade, as well as everybody else might be saying, hey, who is this guy? Right? I mean, you could just copy-paste a sentence into Google and check and see if you worry about it. I had about a dozen students sent me essays, and they said, I think this is plagiarism. Half of them, or 3/4 of them, were already caught by me, so that was okay. And then a couple were plagiarism, but the Grammarly thing was finding a sentence that was, some very general thing. People walk on 2 legs. Oh, that was in the Journal of Anthropology. But whoever wrote it was typing. It was a coincidence, right? So I think we'll be okay on that one. Any other questions about that? Please don't sit in the back. Hey, police, what's up? Yeah, okay. Principal agent problems. All right. Any other questions about the briefing, the peer grading the briefing, or the ranking of the briefing? Okay, someone else sent me an email this morning while we're doing logistics. We'll get to the midterm, and I'll give you some hints on the midterm, which is exciting. But someone said, what is a blog post? And why is that due on the 28th of February, right? Okay, so a blog post is like a little newspaper column, all right? If you look at the peak, you've got columnists and they're writing stuff. Oh, this is what I did partying last week, or why is studying so hard, or why is this weather so shitty this winter? I don't know what it is, right? But it's a column. It's a little opinion that's going to be a couple hundred words. You can, if you go to the internet and you look for blogs, there are millions of blogs. Okay, I suggested early on in the semester that you would actually look into some blogs to see what the style is like, what kind of topics they cover. In this case, I have a blog called Agronomics. You can go look at that. But here's the format of the blog posts. It's not very complicated. So your blog post is going to show up on a web page, and there's all the, on my page there's the Agronomics. Then there's a bunch of stuff down here on the sidebar, and it'll be like title, text, a bottom line, and an image maybe, optional. So the blog post is going to be about, number one requirement. The blog post is going to be about either resource economics or environmental economics, everything that we've been talking about, okay? Don't write about your car stereo system, okay? You can write about balancing between eggs and bacon on your breakfast plate. I've got a resource called eggs. I've got a scarce resource called bacon. I've got to make sure that there's enough bacon for every piece of egg that I put onto my fork, You can do that if you want to. As long as you use the ideas, don't use the words, use the ideas of resource and environmental economics. You can use the words, of course. But don't just say, I wrote the word resources, that's why it's a resource post. Okay? Don't do that. So you're going to discuss something that's of interest to you, and you want to present it to everybody else. You can think about you're writing a little thing that your friends are going to read, that your classmates are going to read, that your grandmother's going to read. Okay? What would grandma want to know about this issue? Okay? So you're going to have a text that describes the situation. Say, here's something funny. Oh, I think this is interesting. Here's the economics of it. This is good, this is bad. I don't care, actually. You can, and that's why it was a good idea, or it still is a good idea, to read other blog posts and see how people discuss things. You want to make a point. Make a point. So you have a text, and your bottom line, the word bottom line means literally the line that's at the bottom of your text, okay? But the bottom line also means a summary. It means what I'm trying to tell you. The bottom line is that you always have to have enough bacon with your eggs, right? That's it. It doesn't have to be a Nobel laureate speech. It just has to be concise, short, interesting, a summary of what you said, okay? Your title of your post, I will require these three things in your post. I require a title. I require a text. And I require a bottom line, okay? Your title should be something which is going to be like a headline of a newspaper. Bacon is good. Or more bacon. You can do it anything you want, all right? The title should be, it's only going to be a few words though. Do not write a 42-word title, okay? Somewhere between 1 and 10 words, I would say, is enough words for a title. Because it's got to fit on the blog. It can't just roll as this long title. After class, go look at Agronomics and see a blog post. I have one this morning called Speed Blogging, which is not the same format as here, but you can look down at the last week of blog posts, okay? So, you're going to have a title, text. This is going to be 100 to 200, let's say 300 words. You do not want to write too many words. Too many words is boring. I'm going to say 100 to 200 words, okay? If you go to 210 words, I don't care. If you write 1,000 words, I also don't care, but you're probably going to get the worst grade, okay? Because I already have 3 people volunteering, and Hossein and I, there's going to be 5 of us. This is the grading question. And 5 of us are going to be looking at all the blog posts. Now, let's say that there's 80 blog posts. If you don't send it in, you get a 0. Okay. If you send in a blog post, the top 5 are going to get an A, or 10 points, or whatever I wrote on the syllabus. The bottom 5, I think on the syllabus I wrote top 3 and bottom 3. I've changed that to 5. So top 5 are going to get an A. The bottom 5 are going to get a C. And everybody else is going to get a B. So if you turn in something decent, great, it's a B. If you turn in something crap, you're going to get a C. Decent, and decent is this. If you turn in something great, you're going to get an A. And I'll tell a bunch of people about it, you'll be famous. But the thing is this. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on you to write a fantastic world's best blog post. I want you to write something decent, okay? The majority of you are going to get a decent grade. The pressure on you is that this is going to go on the internet and everybody's going to see it, of course. This is way worse than your briefings because it's going to be over on the internet, right? And your name is associated with it. It will have your name on it. And it's your work, right? You're presenting your ideas. And remember that everybody in the class has to leave a comment on other people's blog posts, right? And you can't say, oh, you're a hoser on the comment. I guess you could do it, but that's kind of a sad comment. Okay? So you're going to be reading each other's posts. And if anything, I want you to take a little pride in what's going on. I want you to say, I wrote this is me, and I think this is interesting to you. I wrote this, and this is boring, is not a really good motivation. Okay? So try and make it interesting. It doesn't have to be very long. It just has to be interesting. Okay? Please have your friends, family, colleagues, and strangers check your grammar and spelling. I will not check your grammar and spelling. I will not fix anything. Okay? It goes up, typos and all. If you plagiarize, please don't plagiarize. Okay? Please don't plagiarize. If you use any references, you put a hyperlink, okay? So here's what I want to tell you also. You need a title, 1, a text, 2, a 3, a bottom line, and 4 is hyperlinks. And you could say, every time I go to the cafeteria, I worry about the amount of eggs and bacon there are. And when I get bacon, I'm very happy, although bacon will kill you, right? You don't have to put that in quotes at all. That's the sentence that you wrote, although bacon will kill you. But then you put that's a link. That's a hyperlink. Does everybody know what a hyperlink is? Okay, or who doesn't know what a hyperlink is? Sorry, I did the other way around. So what you want to do when you send me this text is you want to say, okay, let's say bacon will kill you. Okay, and then you want to put this square brackets or parentheses in the text and say HTTP. You post in the thing and you say National Chicken Council, all right, the NCC.com, the NationalChickenCouncil.com, and you just put the hyperlink in. Don't hyperlink the text that you email to me, right? Don't embed a link. Just copy and paste it so that it spells it out. Okay? It'll say HTTP or www, and then I will create your hyperlinks. Is that clear to everybody? If it is not clear to you at home or anybody here, ask your friends, okay? I'm not going to kill your blog post if you do the hyperlinks wrong, but just make it easier for me, okay? Bacon will kill you. I love bacon, though. Okay. So you do not have to have hyperlinks. Hyperlinks are very helpful, okay? If you're going to quote anybody, if you want to say, I was reading this story the other day, this story, right? You put hyperlinks for this story. You don't have to write the whole title. You don't have to write the magazine, the journal. You don't have to say that you got it off your friend or anything like that, okay? That's the requirements. It's going to be due as an email to me. Don't do it through Canvas. Email me at my SFU or my Gmail address, I don't care, by midnight on Friday, February 28th. All right? Some of you are going to hit the button at 11:59 on Friday. That's fine. It's okay to send it in before midnight on Friday, February 28th. Okay? You can send it today if you want to. In fact, somebody already did submit their blog post. Okay? I'm going to use your name on that. I'm not going to link to your email address. Okay? It's just going to have your name. If you want an image, if you want a photo of yourself or of a dog or anything else, you can send that as an attachment to the email to me, okay? And I will insert that for you. Photos are very nice. They help people understand things, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. It's not obligatory, but if you want to use a photo or an image, that's fine. Do not send more than one. One is tops, okay? I don't want to spend all day embedding. But hyperlinks and images, this is optional. And by the way, if you send in and you want to have, say for example you've got a Chinese name and you've got a Canadian version of a Chinese name, you can use either one. Okay, just tell me which name you want to be known as. All right, and if you've got a Canadian name and you want to be Snoop Dogg or whatever, you can't do that. All right, just try and stick with something realistic. Snoop Lion or whatever his name is. Okay, any questions on the blog post? Remember that timing is going to be tight for you a little bit because the midterm is next Tuesday and the blog post is due on Friday. I believe that's enough time to write a blog post, but just in case you're worried about timing, it's not a bad idea to at least start thinking about ideas or drafting ideas or something like that. That's the blog post. Now, midterm. The midterm is going to be, it's going to be next Tuesday. It can take the whole, is it allowed to take the whole two things? I'm not interested in you sitting here and writing around for 2 sessions, but it's going to be, you'll have that time. You'll have as much time as you want. You have to bring booklets? Is that what happens? No? I tell you? Oh, gosh. I'll figure it out, okay? I'll figure it out. It'll probably be. Oh, so if I have a handout thing and I say write your stuff in here, no. I'm gonna print it on paper. I don't like booklets. It's ridiculous. Okay, so I'm gonna provide you guys with the stuff, and there will be, or there is very highly likely to be, some supply and demand diagrams. Okay, there's not going to be calculus. You've seen almost no math here, and you won't see it on the exam. I might use multiple choice. I might use true false. I might use short answer. Okay, I haven't declared everything right now. I'll probably use a mix of those things. If you've been paying attention to the lectures, then you're going to be doing fine, right? It will draw on all of the readings, including Scott and Hardin, Gordon Scott and what's his name, Garrett Hardin. And the Dolan text only, as I mentioned, the introduction in Chapter 1. I might have a question from Dolan. It's not a big deal. Dolan's going to be after the midterm, okay? So when I say you should get the point of the readings, you should get the point of Hayek. What did Hayek say? He said a couple things. Tell me one thing he said in his essay. So you still have to read Hayek. Do you remember what Hayek said? Good. You're on the way, okay? You're not on the way. You should go read Hayek, all right? If you have no clue about what's in these essays, I'm not going to say on the midterm, what did Hayek say, okay? That's not going to be the question. But it'll be something, and if you write something that Garrett Hardin said in the Hayek section, not a good idea, all right? So just have a clue on the readings. But it's not going to be super detailed questions about the readings. It's going to be a question about the main point of the reading, all right? And I'll talk about the main points of Hardin. I already talked about Hardin and the Tragedy of the Commons. I didn't talk about Gordon, so I'll talk about Gordon on Thursday. Okay. Any questions about all of these logistical grading, et cetera, things? Yeah. How many what? How many requirements of the reading? Yeah. No, all the ones. Readings. No, it's not that many. Gordon, Hardin, Coase, Dietz. Yeah. Those are all in the midterm. Yeah. As well as the first couple chapters of Dolan and Hayek. That's 6 different authors. Yes? Yes? Okay. Other questions about this stuff? Yes, you write one blog post. If your friend is lazy, you can write his too. Anything that involves resource or environmental economic ideas. Okay? It could be about skiing, right? As long as you start talking about the resource or environmental dimension of skiing, okay? All right. 1, 2. Oh, by the way, the lecture, the John Reynolds lecture, annoying to me. He asked me to pull his lecture because of, he said, remember that he mentioned this Fisheries Council he's on? He said he's up for re-election on the Fisheries Council, and he's worried to the point of paranoia that someone will see this on the internet, and he will not get re-elected to the Fisheries Council. This is, to me, very amazing, because I say stuff all the time that people should fire me for, but he's actually the opposite of me, or the complement to me, but very often a much more common kind of professional, right? My girlfriend got an email last night from one of her old professors at the University of Calgary, because she asked that professor about pollution from the oil sands tailing ponds. And he wrote a very long answer back to her that said very little. And, we're professionals, right? We can use many words to say nothing. What I'm asking you to do here, for example, is to use few words to say something, right? And I thought that was a really great lecture from John, and those of you who are here live enjoyed it. It will not be on the internet for review before the midterm. His slides are up there still. There is an audio tape still. Don't tell anybody, YouTube. Okay? But if you go to the Teach page on KYSQ, the link if I didn't give it to you, I'll give it to you again. My personal site is KYSQ. The Teach, and that's where I have the syllabus and the stuff, but also where I have links to MP3s and videos and so on. Anyway, so he's like, "Oh, pull that thing," and that's ridiculous. But I think you got an idea of what he was discussing in the lecture, and that's going to be helpful for life and for the midterm. I'm trying to get a couple guest lecturers to come in because it looks like I'll be gone March 11th. This doesn't matter to you right now, but it's amazing because both of them are experts on energy and pipelines, right? So I know you're all experts now because you've written briefings and you've read all these briefings, but hopefully they'll come in and give you a more enlightened view of these issues compared to what I could give you. So that would be very exciting for me, and we'll have them on tape as well. Right, so back to new topics. Okay, so that he was talking about fisheries. I want to talk about forestry today, and I want to give an explanation on the whole jobs are a cost thing, because that's come up more than once. And it's a significant issue in terms of the way that economists think about it compared to the way that the general public or politicians think about it. So I want to just go over that again for a moment with you. To try and make it clear what we're talking about. So, in an economy, say that we're all an economy here, okay? In an economy where people are producing value, I will do something that you are willing to pay for. Unfortunately, I'm going to use the example, I'm going to lecture, okay? So I'm going to lecture, and say it's worth, this lecture for you is worth $50, $200, something big, right, or whatever. So it's worth $20 to you, and it's worth $10 to you, and $20 to you, and $25 to you. Wake up. He's not a morning guy. Okay, so the thing is that you'll say, it's worth something to me. I will produce a lecture, and you will give me some money, which is similar, which is less than the value to you, right? The price should be less than the value because you're going to get a little bit of consumer surplus. And I'm going to take that money and I'm going to go to you and I'm going to buy a pair of shoes or I'm going to buy a car or whatever, right? So we know that I'm providing something which costs me less than the price and you're paying something which costs you less than the value. Hold it. Yes, that's the correct way to say it. So there's a surplus to me as a producer and there's a surplus to you as a consumer. Okay, that's just the basic of economics. Now, in the economy, if you produce something of value and you produce something of value and all of you are producing different things of value, we'll be trading with each other and we'll be gaining from trade. We'll be benefiting from trade. That's a basic idea. And the more we can do to create value, the richer we are, in a sense. If I can come up with an invention that could help you write blog posts and it costs $1, and you're like, that's worth $5 to me, all of you will buy this thing, right? And you'll all be better off. If it's worth $5 and you pay $1, you're all $4 better off. Although yesterday that invention didn't exist. So economies grow because of invention, and people get benefits because of those gains from trade. And when I come down and say to a business guy, I say, how many people do you have working here? The guy will say, I've got 5 people working here. It's like, why don't you hire a 6th person? He'll say, because the 6th person is not worth it to me. The cost of wages, $15 an hour for that person, is not the same as the benefits to me. Okay? You can go to Starbucks anywhere on campus or anywhere in the world, really, and you'll see, like on campus here, probably after, let's say, 9 o'clock, they've got more people working at Starbucks than they do at 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, why is that? Is that because people are too lazy to get out of bed? No, it's because they haven't been scheduled for a shift, right? The manager at Starbucks says, we only need one person to open up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Then there's going to be a big rush of students from 9 until, say, noon. So we need to have a whole bunch of part-time staff. This is why student employees are great, right? You come in, you work for a couple hours, and you go back to whatever. So the Starbucks staffing is going up because the value of extra employees is much higher when there's a lot of customers. They want to make sure they can serve coffee as fast as possible. When there are fewer customers, they want to have fewer employees, and so they actually lay off, they fire the employees for a couple hours. Then they hire them again for a couple hours. Does that make sense? Okay. So the business person is thinking of the job in terms of, can you create value? To me, the business person. The worker, if you're a worker, number one, you like a job. Number two, you want to be paid more. Every worker enjoys that, right? Oh, Mom, can I mow the lawn? Sure, son. How about you give me 10 bucks, Mom? No, son. Right? Okay, son, I'll pay you 10 bucks. How about 20 bucks, Mom? No, son. Okay? So obviously you want to make more money as a worker. The discussion around jobs is not about how you feel as a worker making a salary. The discussion around jobs is, can you produce value that's greater than your wages? Okay? So that's the first point about jobs. Is value, this is a value or product or surplus. All these words are correct. They must be greater than wages. This is the benefit, this is the cost, right? Wait, what did I just say? What is this? Benefit or cost? Everyone, what is it? Benefit or cost? And this one is benefit or cost? To who? The employer, the company, right? To the worker, is this a benefit or a cost? Benefit. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that the discussion around jobs, and when I say jobs are a cost to the employer. That's what I'm talking about. And employers have no problems with that cost when employees produce benefits. So if you go to your employer and say, I'm just a cost to you, the employer say, no, you're a benefit to me, which actually is true, right? Because the more you create compared to your wages, the bigger the surplus is to the employer. So in some ways, the cost and the benefit thing is a little bit strange because we're just using these words, but you want to realize how these people think of things. Now, when a politician says, I created jobs, there's two ways a politician can create jobs. The first is that the politician says, hey, you, come work for the government. I'm going to give you a desk, $50,000 a year. You be important, right? I've just created a job. I'm the politician, right? Are you happy with $50,000 a year so far? So you don't have to do anything, by the way. You just, enjoy that job. So I created a job as a politician, and I am paying her $50,000 from where? Tax money, from you guys. Right? Not my pocket. And do you care if her job costs $50,000 or $10,000 or $150,000? You as taxpayers, when will you care? Right. Is the cost less than the benefit? If I pay her $50,000 and she creates peace and justice throughout the land, that's a bargain, right? There is a role for working for the government. You're a judge, you're a police officer, you're a regulator who is helping with asymmetric information problems, right? There are also jobs of the government where nothing is happening, where you sit around and do nothing all day, right? Companies don't have those jobs. Small businesses don't have those jobs unless it's the children of the owner, right? Small businesses don't have those jobs because they can't afford to lose money all the time on staff. Politicians and governments have those jobs more often because they're spending other people's money, right? Taxpayers' money. So the question of government jobs is not can the government create jobs, but can the government create jobs that add value for society? Okay, that's one thing. But way more important than the government creating jobs is the private sector. In China, the private sector was extremely small back in the 1980s. The formal private sector was extremely small. That has changed in the last several decades, where the formal private sector is much larger. They have also state-owned enterprises and so on. The informal sector has always been around, always will be around. In the United States, the private sector is quite large relative to the government. In the Scandinavian countries, the government sector is quite large relative to the US version, right? Because in Scandinavian countries, the people might work for a hospital which is owned by the government. In the US, the hospital is owned by a company that's supposedly nonprofit, but it's a little bit more profits, right? So there's lots and lots and lots of jobs in the private sector. The calculus, the discussion, the mathematics of this this sector is, can we get more benefit than cost? That's the whole point of the private sector. That's what they want to do. Does the government create private sector jobs? Yes or no? So who says yes? Raise your hand. The government creates private sector jobs. No, the government doesn't create private sector jobs. I have no idea what you're talking about. Where's all the rest of you guys? What do you think? You're thoughtful, I'll ask you. That's pretty good. I like that. That's almost exactly what I was going to say. Right? The government sets up policies that makes it possible for the private sector to do things, which includes creating jobs. Right? The government doesn't directly create jobs. The government helps the private sector exist. Right? They say, here's law, contract law. Here's law of hiring people. Here's healthcare, whatever, framework, so the people don't die on the job or whatever. The government creates the conditions under which the private sector works. The government can crush the private sector if it wants to, with laws and regulations and so on. The government can make it easy for the private sector to operate, right, by helping provide public goods such as law and order or trade negotiations with other countries. There's all kinds of things the government can do, but ultimately the private sector is the source of jobs. People in the private sector, employers are hiring people, right? Jobs, private sector jobs are created by the private sector. It's that complicated. It's not that hard, okay? But the government has a big influence on the growth of the private sector or the retardation or the collapse of the private sector, okay? So that's, in Argentina right now, and for the last couple of years, the government has said, farmers, you're producing a lot of soy, and we, the government, need money, so we're going to tax your soybean exports. A lot of the soybean exports go to China, right? We're going to tax that soybean exports, and we're going to use that money to buy airplanes for the president of Argentina. So the private sector has a higher cost. Maybe they fire some people, maybe they lose some jobs, but they lose some profits for sure. They lose some business because their prices are higher. The government takes the money and spends it on a private airplane for the president, which does not help the people of Argentina, because an airplane is only good for the president. It doesn't help them in terms of law and order. The riots in Brazil, or the protests in Brazil and the riots in Ukraine in the last couple months have been about exactly the same thing. The government is spending our money on bullshit. Right? In Brazil, they're building big sports stadiums that are not going to go anywhere. In Ukraine, they're corrupt like crazy. This is amazing. I was actually there consulting last year, and I got fired from that job because I wouldn't go with the corruption. It was quite interesting. So those governments are taking a bunch of tax money and doing nothing beneficial for the citizens in terms of public goods, in terms of law and order, because there's corruption, or in terms of the private sector, in terms of creating the conditions under which the private sector can thrive. Okay? That's what I mean by the government doesn't create jobs. They create these kinds of jobs, police, etc., but most of the time the government is going to create the conditions for jobs. But in all the times, jobs are a cost. You have to think about the benefits. So when the government says, we should have this pipeline because it's going to create jobs, that's very strange. Because if you can run a pipeline with no labor and save money, why wouldn't you do that? If the government wants to create a pipeline that creates lots of jobs, why not have 3 times as many people? I mean, 100 people working at a refinery? Let's have 400 people. Then we'll really create some jobs. So the government creates the conditions for a pipeline or a refinery or a shoe factory or a school, and then the refinery or the pipeline or the shoe factory, they hire as many workers or as few workers as is necessary, right? And the other thing is about pipelines, by the way, the government doesn't create pipelines. The government allows the pipeline to happen. If there was no government, there'd be pipelines everywhere, right? Because the whole point is that they're trying to look at the regulations to see if a pipeline's a good idea because of environmental pollution. Because the government of BC, in theory, and Alberta, very much in theory, is trying to protect citizens from bad harms from pipelines. If pipelines were moving milk and honey, there would not be so much of a concern about them. Okay, so the government is saying, we're going to allow this pipeline, and the government sometimes says, you cannot have any jobs with that pipeline because we've decided we want it to be fully automated, like the SkyTrain. They had the SkyTrain, they didn't create any jobs there. That's a terrible policy, right? No, because it's cheaper, right? They're trying to lower the cost to consumers so they can use the SkyTrain more cheaply. So that's the discussion on jobs and government. Any questions on that? I'm just trying to push back against the whole idea that jobs alone only are, number one, good, and number two, the government creates them. Those are the 2 main points. Okay? All right. Ding, 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 ding. Yes? Yes. If the government owns a national company, then what? Kind of, right? So state-owned enterprises or public corporations, they exist in many crown corporations in Canada. The government owns this enterprise formally, and say that it has, say that it's producing oil. So it's just the same as a private corporation, except it's owned by the government. And it's producing oil. And the government can create jobs in that corporation in the exact same way as it can create jobs in a private corporation by telling that corporation, you have to hire 20 more people because we told you to. That's how they can create a job. That's not necessarily creating value. That's destroying value, right? So the value might be less than the wage, right? So the Pemex is the national oil monopoly of Mexico. Oil is a very popular topic for this because it's seen as a national resource, and so the people of the country should benefit. And so what Pemex has become over the years, over the decades, is a place where a whole bunch of people are given jobs who don't do anything. Right? This is the same in a lot of Middle Eastern countries where, like the Gulf states, like Saudi Arabia is famous for this. But if you're a citizen of Saudi Arabia, you get a job. I'm going to go work there in May. This could be very interesting. You're given a job because you're a citizen. And then you don't go to the job. You hire a guy from Bangladesh to do your job for 1/4 of the wage, and then you stay by the pool. But the guy from Bangladesh can't take your job because he's not a Saudi citizen, right? And but the thing in Mexico is give my nephew a job at Pemex. He drives cars. He's good at driving cars, right? And we already have like 6,000 drivers, right? We have 10 drivers for every staff, right? So they end up having all these extra jobs. Sometimes they're called ghost jobs, right? There's sometimes a ghost job will be someone who never shows up and they get paid. Sometimes it's someone who doesn't even exist, and their salary goes into the boss's pocket, right? So the idea of what you're getting at is that a public corporation or state-owned enterprise should have just as many jobs as this formula will tell you, right? If you have more jobs because the government is telling you to, then it's just another way of losing money. Okay? Let's take a 10-minute break. One of them on the blog post, just to clarify. You can have a whole new idea. You could say, I woke up this morning, I had a dream, and I decided I was going to be a carrot. I don't care what it is. You can write about it. There's no hyperlinks. You don't have to have a citation or anything like that. Okay? So you can write a new idea. You can write about something that's going on in another language, another country, and you're going to tell the world about it in English. If you want to have a link to another language source, that's okay. Just say, whatever, link in Turkish, link in Chinese, I don't care. When you send it to me, I want you to do not send it. It's hard to ask you this, but just try and put it in an email to me. Like what I want is a plain text email, but some of the email will be formatted. That's okay. I can mess with any kind of email. Send it in an email. Do not send a Word attachment. Okay? Send it in an email to me, either to dzetland@sfu.ca or dzetland@gmail.com. Okay? Don't send it through Canvas. Don't send a Word attachment. It'll just be a pain in the ass for me. I'll knock a point off because I'm annoyed. Okay? All right. In fact, I will. I promise. I promise. I will knock. Alex, you hear that? You heard that? I'll knock a point off if what?
About the attachment.
Pretty much. Don't send an attachment, right? You don't get points, all right? So, the briefing, just so you understand, we have several steps. I know you haven't done this before, so I want to try and make it clear. You wrote a briefing, right? Your briefing went to 3 different peers. Each of your peers wrote a little feedback for you, which they've submitted online to Canvas today, right, by 8:30. There might be some issues with people not submitting them on time. I'll worry about that, my problem. You're going to get these sent back to you by me or Hossein. We're going to send links. We're going to send something. Then all I want you to do is I want you to say the number, whatever number it is we give you. If it says Peer 1, if it says 6542, I don't care. 6542, I give an A. 3625, I give a B. Whatever that is, okay? But you're going to do that on Canvas, okay? I'll make sure that you can submit your assignment on Canvas, but I just want it in a plain text box on Canvas. I will test this, and I'll try and send it to you in a clear email to describe what to do, okay? So again, you don't have to send a Word document. I don't want you to send me an email. So one thing, email yes. Another thing, email no, okay? So just try and follow those directions for that particular assignment. Sorry, all this electronic efficiency is a pain in the ass. Any questions yet still on those things? Okay, those are going to be due by start of class on Thursday, unless I screw up and you don't get it on time, and then I'll give you more time. Okay, so don't worry about the timing. I think we're going to try and send all those things back to you today, and that'll give you basically tomorrow to read 1 page each. So to read 3 pages, decide which one you like more or less, and then put the gradient, the ranking on Canvas. Okay, I might do it so it's due on the next week, but you'll have plenty of time to do it. Okay. All right. Moving right along to forestry. So forestry is not too much different than fisheries. Forests are they're full of resources, as in trees. They also provide a lot of environmental benefits. So they have kind of a dual purpose. Fisheries are helpful because there's food in a fishery, but fisheries are also part of ecosystems. So the resources discussion with fisheries is how do we get the benefit of this fishery by taking the fish and eating the fish without necessarily destroying the ecosystem that the fishery is part of, right? Or even worse, or even better, I don't know, they're both bad, destroying the fishery itself, okay? So In a fishery, you're going to have a coastline, and there's going to be a fishery where the fish might live, or there might be some fish that come by. They're migrating. Forests are simpler because they tend to stay in one spot. And you might have the trees or something like that, or you might have a flat area, and you've got trees like that. The basic dynamics of a forest is the same as a fishery, right? You're going to have a stock in year 0. You're going to add alpha times the stock. Alpha is growth minus beta times the stock, which is going to be harvest. And that's going to equal stock in year 1, or at the end of year 1. So at the start of the year, you've got some trees. At the start of the year, you've got some fish. During the year, the trees or the fish, they grow. And you take some out. You harvest some, right? You might lose some because of pests. You might lose some because of other fish, right? Fish, trees, fish, trees. They're almost the same. The trees don't move, the fish move. That's really the only difference. So that's how we're going to treat this as a resource. The question from a resource perspective, however, is not this biological process. The question is, how do we manage the resource, right? And guess what? We're back to the same old questions. So we had fisheries. We were going to manage them. We have a forest. How are we going to manage a forest? What's one way? I'm going to ask you. What's one way of managing a forest to make sure that it is not overexploited? Don't know. Sorry? A limit on using the forest? What's an example of a limit on using a forest? No, not you, her. I'm asking her, because you just helped her. Now she's going to help you. What's an example of a limit on using a forest? Or a fishery? I've got a tree here. Give me an example of limiting access to this tree. No trees? Where you come from? How are we going to do this? Hold on. Auction rights. So number one, you create rights. Number one, you create laws and property, right? Rights. Number two, you allocate those through an auction or a market. Okay? So what you do is you say, hey, look, I've got this much harvest that's sustainable, 20 units, whatever it is. And I will allow 20 units to be taken out by whoever pays the highest price. This is the economist's dream, right? This is the most efficient way to harvest a forest or a fishery, because the auction will allow people who bid the highest to get the forest. In California, where I'm from, I believe the number is that who's heard of a redwood tree? A redwood tree? A redwood tree is a tree, guess what, with redwood. They are the largest trees in the world. They grow the tallest of any tree in the world, and they get fat, like the biggest trees in the world, too. There's two types. So the redwood trees, as a species, are both the tallest and the fattest. And when white people came to California, they saw a whole bunch of free trees. And so they started cutting the trees and cutting the trees and cutting the trees. And now California has, I think, 3% of its original tree cover, mostly in parks, but there are also privately owned parks, basically, but also privately owned forests where they harvest the trees for wood. Now, a redwood tree is really nice because the wood is very strong against insects. It will not, the insects will not eat it, and it's also very good against fire. So it's good to build your house out of redwood because the bugs won't eat it and the fire won't burn it down as easily as other trees. But when it came down to free trees, they started chopping down the trees and just turning them into dust to make paper. Because a tree is free and the paper is worth maybe, I don't know, $100 a ton. Why not convert free into $100? But now if you go to a store and you'll say, I want to have redwood floors on my house, it's one of the most expensive woods out there, right? Like the tropical hardwoods are the same thing. It's extremely expensive because there aren't very many redwoods left anymore, right? This has happened with the cypress trees in the Middle East, which are in the Bible, because they took all the cypress trees and they cut them and they made churches and they made mosques. And it turns out they wanted to make a lot of churches and mosques. And so there's very, very, very few. The flag of Lebanon has a tree on it, a cypress tree. But Lebanon has very few of these trees left. They're almost gone, right? Because they cut them all down and they use them for things. And the harvest, guess what, was greater than the growth rate, right? They did not limit it to 20 units. They said, take as much as you want. So what happens when we have this harvest greater than growth is your population will go like this until it goes to zero. It goes extinct until all the trees are gone. California, again talking about flags, California has on its flag, this is a big trivia question, who knows what's on the flag of California? It's an animal. It's a grizzly bear, which guess what? Extinct, right? We love the grizzly bear so much we ate them all, right? Now we have an extinct animal on our flag of the state, which is just really funny or sad, right? So if your population goes to zero, it's extinct, it's gone. Grizzly bears still live in Alaska and so on, but in California they don't exist there anymore. So when your growth is less than your harvest, what you're doing is you're mining the resource. This is a key word I want you to remember for this class. Mining. Usually when you think about mining, you're mining coal, right? You're mining gold, you're mining diamonds. But if you're mining a renewable resource like fish or like trees, that means you're harvesting it faster than it's growing. Okay? It's not sustainable by definition. So what we get at here is that we have renewable resources like fish, like trees. Let's just leave it at that. And we've got non-renewable like coal, oil, gold. Okay? Non-renewable from a physical sense means that it's not going to grow, or it's not going to grow in our lifetime, right? Oil deposits are millions of years old. Coal deposits are a variation on that. Gold is because of some geological processes, right? There's not more gold being created as far as we're concerned. We're finding gold, but we're not creating gold, right? Non-renewable resources, they're there. You can take them in or you can take them out, and you take them out as fast as makes sense financially, right? It's back to the discount rates. If the price of gold is high, you take more gold out of the ground. If the technology for taking gold out of the ground is cheap, you take more gold out of the ground. If you're going to... anyway, that's the way it works with non-renewable resources. Renewable resources mean that you can take some and there'll be more there again next year if you don't take too much. The key is if you don't take too much. If you mine the resource, if you chop all the trees down, then there's no little seeds for trees, there's no habitat for trees, and you can't get, and other species come in and take over the territory, right? That's what happens in Brazil, for example, where the rainforest is this very large ecosystem with thousands of species all connected together. You've got 50 different trees. If in this area of this room, in the rainforest, you'll have 2,000 species, right? In Canada, in this area, you'll have maybe 20 species. The rainforest has a whole bunch of species. If you come by and chop everything down, you cut everything down, and you burn it off, and then you allow some grass to grow and you put cows on here, if you come back in 50 years, you may not have a rainforest, right? If there's a rainforest right next door, it might slowly move over here. But if you clear cut it for 1,000 kilometers, you're not going to have a rainforest. It's gone. Your renewable resource is no longer renewed, okay? So when it comes down to fisheries, if you catch all the fish, all the Atlantic cod off the coast, the Atlantic coast, they don't recover, right? Because you cut too many, other species move in and take over. One of the discussions on climate change is that the oceans. Who knows what's going on with the oceans and climate change? What?
Like the temperature from the top goes down to the bottom, and then it keeps circulating. So the temperature in the ocean is actually rising.
Right.
And that's as much as I know.
That's good. That's a good start. What's the other thing that's happening?
Really big currents are starting to slow, so that the water's not circulating.
Right. So the change of temperatures can change the ocean currents, which actually will change the entire global climate, which is a nightmare for people that live in like Northern Europe because they're benefiting from all the tropical waters coming from the Caribbean, right? I don't know how that's going to have impacts. Well, there's impacts all over the world, and trust me, they're not going to be good because we're not expecting them to happen, right? Never in human history have some of these things happened, so we don't even know how it's going to be like. It's going to be different. But another thing that's happened in the ocean is called ocean acidification, because CO2, which is carbon dioxide, when it combines with water, it makes, I think it's called carbolic acid or carbonic acid. It makes the ocean more acidic. An acid is not good for little beasts with shells, oysters, abalone, crab, and diatoms, and so all these things that are in the food chain. What that means is that as the ocean not just heats up but acidifies, is that the smallest creatures in the ocean will die, which means the larger creatures won't be able to eat them, which means that we won't be able to eat fish because of that. Not because of overharvesting, but because the entire ecosystem has changed, right? This is a huge nightmare for people who like fish, let alone people who like ecosystems. But one of the discussions is that the oceans will be full of jellyfish. Jellyfish, some people like eating jellyfish. I like salmon, I like, tuna. But jellyfish is going to be the cuisine, the fish du jour, basically, in 100 years. Hopefully not in my lifetime, but if these predictions come true, it's going to be a little bit of a nightmare. So what you get is the fish are going to go away, and they're going to be replaced by jellyfish. There's an interesting interaction here, now that I'm talking about it, between ecological changes and resources, right? Climate change has changed the habitats of various insects and animals. Some of them are migrating to places where they were not seen before. In Canada, they have these pine beetles. Are they called pine? Is that the full name? Pine beetles, which are not usually living in Canada in the forests because it's too cold in the winter. That kills them. But because the winters are not so cold, the pine beetles can overwinter. They can live and they can reproduce. And when they eat the trees die. Thousands, millions even of hectares of trees will die. And now the irony is that Canada has spent a long time talking about harvesting timber and fighting with the U.S. about, the U.S. says, you're just killing trees, and they said, we have plenty of trees to kill, and please buy our trees, and the U.S. says, no, we want to buy American trees, and the Chinese like, we'll buy your trees, and whatever. But now the pine beetle is killing 100 times more trees than lumberjacks could ever get to, and the wood it's going to fall back in the ecosystem. So the wood in these forests goes from being a renewable resource to being not just non-renewable, but gone, but dead, right? So the forest inventory, the forest wealth of Canada is disappearing right in front of our eyes because of this impact of climate change. The same way as climate change is taking the fish away and destroying all the fisheries. The Atlantic tuna might be in trouble because of overfishing. It could be in worse trouble because of climate change. So there's these forces that are going together. There's human consumption of resources, and there's the feedback loop from the human consumption of oil and energy and fossil fuels that's actually affecting resources in a secondary way through the ecosystem. This is how these two themes relate, and that's why I'm talking about it. This class is not just about resources, it's about environment because they affect each other. Right? This is a dynamic that's very significant. So, the trees will grow if you have a property right around them. You can grow them. You could harvest one tree out of 50. If the tree takes 50 years to grow, that's sustainable. Right? You take one tree per year, and it takes 50 years to replace the trees, you're going to be sustainable. If you take one tree a year, and it takes 10 years to replace a tree, and you've got 50 there, then you're going to have more and more and more trees because you're not taking them away very fast, right? So if you get 10 new trees a year, but you harvest one, that's sustainable. If you get one new tree a year and you harvest 10, that's not sustainable, right? If it's not sustainable, what's it called? Surface? No. Surplus? No. That's a good word, but that's not the word. If it's not sustainable, what's it called? It's not sustainable, what's it called? Non-sustainable. That's right. That's what I just said. It's called mining. This is like, on the midterm, I'm going to write the answer on the board, and you're going to be like, oh, God, this question's so hard. It's called mining, right? If it's not mining, it's called harvesting if you want, right? But like mining is the word I want you to pay attention to here. Okay? Now, you can do many different, you can put property rights around your resources in many different ways. One way is to have a property right with an auction. What's another way? I asked the girl who's behind the guy. Just wave at her. You. What's another way of protecting your forests for sustainable harvest? What? Regulation. Yes. Don't touch these trees. That's a regulation, right? Because if you're going to harvest trees, then you have to figure out who's going to harvest it or something. You can have a regulation saying that people wearing glasses get to cut the trees, and people who don't, everyone's going to go out and buy glasses. Okay, so you have to have a problem. Like, I don't know, people with one leg can harvest trees, right? One-legged lumberjacks are okay, but no one else is allowed. That's one way because you can't cut very fast if you only have one leg, right? The tree's coming towards you, you're trying to run away, right? It's not a bad regulation, right? Remember the fisheries regulation. They said the boat can only be this long. So the boats got fatter and fatter and fatter. So there was like, oh, shoot, that won't work. Okay, your fishing boat can have no fishermen on it. That's one way of doing it. Regulation isn't always the most efficient way to do it, but it can work, right? What's another way of doing this? I'm asking you. You, yep. What's another way of making sure your forests are around? Sell the land. Kind of, not really. I want something different than that. Selling the land implies a property right that's already been privatized, which is what we got to with the auctions and markets. Don't know? What's another way? I'll come back and ask somebody. That's still working. You don't know? No idea? Come on. You don't know? Ask the guy next to you. You don't know? You know?
Like make it into a club good?
Yes. You guys are a club. Two of you. Club. Right? It's a communal good. Right? You don't know who owns it, except that you know that you all own it. And if someone, so this is what happens all the time with trees especially, right? Everybody in the community owns the forest collectively. It's not easy to harvest a tree, right? I mean, number one, okay, you can cut it down. If you have a chainsaw, you can cut it down quickly. Now you got a whole tree. And everybody knows because everybody heard the chainsaw, right? So it's actually not that hard for a community to manage forests as a collective good, as a club good. And that's how they have done it. This is what Ostrom found. right? Oh, let's go to Nepal and see what they do. Oh, look, we all own this together. So we have community forestry. And the community might have some issues like, okay, well, we need some more trees to harvest this year because it was cold and we need to burn wood, or because I want to build a bigger house, or whatever, but it's a very functioning way of managing that resource. Those are the big three, as usual. So recap, what are the big three? What are the big three ways of protecting your resource called the forest? I can't hear you. What's another one? There's two more. Yep, good. Property rights? That's part of property rights. What's the third one? Huh? Community, club good, right? Three main ways. There might be four, but I'm just going to go with that. Okay. So, forests, as I said, you can use a tree for many different things. You can use it to make paper. You can use it to make toilet paper. You can use it to make desks. You can use it to make a sculpture. The value will be determined by the channel it goes through, right? In some ways, if I give you all the rights to the tree and you don't care about trees, that doesn't mean there's a problem with that allocation, as long as you're able to sell it to everybody else who's willing to pay more, right? You want to be able to get to the trees, to the marketplace, so that people can turn it into sculptures instead of turning it into toilet paper. But it's not easy, necessarily, if someone has the rights to remarket it again. The most obvious reason is because you don't even deserve the rights, sorry, right? But you're the chief minister of Sarawak, and your job is to make money, not to care about trees, and you just sell off the trees for cheap. But don't want anybody to know you're selling the trees for cheap, because then they'll see that you're corrupt. So you have this process, the trees start disappearing, and the person who uses it can't really remarket it because it's a black market tree. It isn't supposed to exist, right? There is an organization out there called the Forestry Stewardship Council, FSC. They try and certify trees as being sustainably harvested because there's a big concern of corrupt governments allowing trees to be cut unsustainably to make money in the short term. So they say, this tree is certified as sustainably harvested. Now the first thing that's going to happen is people have counterfeit FSC certificates. So there's this little information war because consumers say, I don't want to use toilet paper that's unsustainably harvested, literally, or office paper. They say, I don't want to eat a fish that's unsustainably harvested. If it's a salmon, I want it to be wild. I want it to be caught by First Nations. I don't want a salmon to be caught from a factory ship or from a farm. So they try and label these products as being certified so that end consumers can know what's going on. This is a huge problem in terms of asymmetric information in the marketplace, also in terms of regulation. Because if the regulations don't work and an FSC official ends up being corrupt, that a whole bunch of FSC stuff comes on the market and it's not sustainable, and all the consumers who wanted to pay extra, double, let's say, for that product don't like it anymore, and the brand loses all its value, right? That is a attempted solution to unsustainability. So if the property rights are weak, we try and use labeling and certification to help consumers understand that it's still sustainable. If property rights are strong, then it should be sustainable because you want to make money, right? The people who have strong property rights. Did I tell you about the conservationist monopolists or that monopoly conservation? No? Let me tell you. This is some economics that's useful. Then we'll get into some environmental stuff. So if we have supply and demand, okay, demand is sloping down and I'm a monopolist. Why is demand sloping down if I'm a monopolist? Am I a price taker or a price maker? Why am I a price maker? I'm the only one in town. If I change the quantity, I can affect the price, right? If I'm supplying this much, P star, if I'm supplying the surplus maximizing quantity of the good, I'm doing Q star. And if I lower the supply of the good, this is my supply curve. This is based on costs, right? If I just say, you know what, forget it. I'm going to put this much monopolistic quantity in the market. I'm just going to limit the market because I'm a monopolist, right? I own 100 trees. Usually I sell 10 trees a year into the market because I'm socially welfare maximizing. But instead I'm going to sell 5 trees into the market. The demand is there. This is the entire demand. This is the entire demand curve from the entire market. But I'm going to lower my quantity of trees I'm selling in the market to 5. Well, now there's fewer trees, and now I can get to the higher prices on the supply curve. Right? Because if I have an auction, the 5 trees are going to go to the people who have the highest willingness to pay, right? If I don't have an auction, I give it to you and you and you and you and you, then you're likely to either use it or you might resell it to take the money. Because if you're over here, this is all a recap, right? You should know this. If I give this tree, I give it to you and you have a value of, let's say this is 20. You have a value of 20, I give it to you, but you could sell it for 30. Then you'd rather have the $30 than the tree, which is worth 20, right? Assuming transaction costs are lower, so on, right? So the point is that I don't care how you do it. If you limit the amount of wood or trees in the market, you're going to have a higher price, okay? And so the monopolist is going to be happy about that because the profits will be higher. Let's just say, because the monopolist is going to get profits of all of this. That's profit for the monopolist compared to, so they lose this triangle here, but they gain all this here. So the monopolist is making more money. Is that clear? Is that clear? Okay, you can do the math, but basically the areas, if you did the algebra and I gave you demand curves and all kinds of crap, you would figure out the same thing. Okay? The consumers over here are unhappy. Right? These consumers over here are all right. They're all right. They're making a surplus, but they're not as happy as they were when the price was lower before. Right? And the irony of this discussion is not necessarily the fact is that consumer surplus is lower. The fact is that producer surplus is higher. We know that from Econ 1, from monopoly. But from a resource perspective, we're harvesting fewer trees, right? And it could be that a monopolist would actually have this situation here. It's much more likely that the monopolist is going to have a harvest that's lower than the growth because the monopolist wants to cut back on quantity in the market no matter what. So if it's unsustainable, it's going to move towards sustainability. If it's sustainable, it's going to be more conservationist. This is a huge, this is not discussed very often, let's say, in resource economics. If you have a whole bunch of individuals, let's say all of you run into the forest and start chopping down trees, then you're going to have a tragedy of the commons. There's no property rights. If I give one of you the right to the whole forest, he could say, I don't think I'm going to work today. But I'll let you chop one tree, but you're going to have to pay this much money, right? You had the lower value. You're going to harvest a tree, right? You're way up on the demand curve. So a monopolist can say, I'll let you harvest a tree and you harvest a tree, and by extracting all that rent, the monopolist is making super profits. But on the other hand, the tree harvests have fallen, which is quite handy if you want to conserve the resource. Now, if the monopolist decides it's party time, let's chop them all down, that's a different problem, right? But that monopolist is not maximizing profits. Okay. Let's get into some of the, of just a few things related to the environment. So, forests are not just known for wood, right? What else is in the forest? Poker. What else is in the forest besides the trees? Species. Any particular one? Birds, yes. Another forest? Beast? Squirrels! What else? You got you already. What are you in the back? What? Oxygen. Yes. Right? Because photosynthesis, the conversion of sunlight into energy, which is how trees grow, takes in carbon dioxide, very important in the big climate change debate, right? Huge. Takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. So the point is that in a forest you've got species, you've got an ecosystem, you've got beasts, you've got truffles, you've got mushrooms, you've got all kinds of other things that are not related to the commercial species that we want to chop down, right? If you chop down all the trees, if you go into the Brazilian rainforest and you chop down all the teak wood trees, and there's one teak, say this is the area here, there's one teak here, and you have to clear everything out to get to that one teak, you chop all the non-commercial trees. If you're doing fishing and you want to catch the tuna, but dolphins get in the net at the same time, oh, I'm sorry, I caught dolphins, they died. Right? I chopped down all those other trees to get to the teak, they died. It's the exact same problem. It's bycatch, right? It's a negative externality. So in the forest, you have all these other living species. You have the ecosystem services, so to speak, of converting carbon dioxide into oxygen. And that is a very big thing in terms of climate change right now, because one of the biggest factors that is forcing climate change is not just harvesting coal and burning coal, or harvesting and burning oil. One of the big factors is chopping down forests for the wood, as well as to create more land to grow more food. The so-called rainforest beef in Brazil, right? They chop a bunch of forests down. In Malaysia and Indonesia and other countries, they've chopped a whole bunch of rainforests down to plant more forests, but only one species, palm oil. Palm oil is important for cookies and baking, but it's extremely valuable in Europe because Europe has a biofuels initiative, right? So I mentioned corn ethanol as the Americans' biggest disaster policy on climate change. Biodiesel is the second biggest disaster, or as big a disaster. So biofuels, no carbon. Why do we have biofuels? Because they're low carbon, no carbon, whatever that is, right? So what we do is we grow corn, we turn the corn into alcohol, we put it in the car instead of gasoline. It turns out that ethanol, corn ethanol, let's say it may save 10% CO2. Corn ethanol might use 10% less CO2 than gasoline. Now, corn itself is full of carbon, but it takes carbon to grow corn. You have to have a tractor. You have to use fertilizers, which are made of, guess what, with natural gas, right? You have to transport the corn. You have to process the corn. You have to use water on the corn. There's not just the CO2 aspect of corn ethanol, but there's also water, fish. There's pollution from corn that just kills fish. There's all kinds of other environmental impacts that come with agriculture. The other biofuel that I just mentioned, palm oil. That one doesn't necessarily use fertilizer and pesticides, although it does. It's much more famous for having a problem called cutting down rainforests to grow palm oil, right? And the reason it makes money and makes sense, and they're still cutting a whole bunch of rainforests, is because the European Union has a law saying you must use palm oil in biodiesel, or we will reward you. We will pay you an extra amount of money if you use palm oil. So the companies in Europe are like, great, we can make $2 a liter from palm oil. Let's go over, cut down the rainforest in Indonesia where property rights don't matter anyway. We'll plant some. Oh, and by the way, we can cut down the forest and sell all that hardwood, right, to China to make for furniture. And then there's some orangutans that die. That's a problem, but we don't worry about that because they can move away. And then we'll grow the palm and we'll make the biodiesel, right? So there's the direct impact, which is expected, which is supposed to be no carbon. This is the promise, right? But all the indirect impacts of deforestation are negative externalities that might mean that the whole idea is a bad idea. I would say it is, right? The problem is that the Europeans, when they made these laws, they assumed, for example, property rights. They assumed, of course, there's property rights over the rainforest, or of course the community there is protecting its rainforest. But that's not true if you have corruption, right? In the US, we have a different kind of corruption, where if you grow corn and you pollute the environment, that's no big deal, because that's good. Farmers make the rules in the US, right? This kind of negative impact is happening over and over again in the biofuels discussion. If you ever want to get disgusted, read more about biofuels. So, we're going to lose, with our deforestation, we're going to have problem with destruction of water quality. Deforestation will lead to floods, greater flooding, because when it rains in the forest, the trees are going to hold a lot of water in the soil and in the roots. This is something I didn't know until a long time later. It's really interesting. If you have a hill and it's covered with trees and it rains, the trees and all the soil there will hold water instead of it just flowing down. If you cut the trees on this side, the water just flows down very quickly. Number one, it's fast. Number two, it takes the soil into the river. The river gets very large, full of a lot of water, right? And then you have flooding downstream because way more water is arriving in the river than ever had arrived before, even though it's exactly the same amount of rain, right? If you change the soil and you change the profile with the trees, the biomass, literally, it releases a lot of water. And the worst thing is, the bad thing is not just flooding that you get right after the rains, but then the river is dead in the summer. Because what happens naturally is this will hold the water and it will release the water gradually over the rest of the year. That's where the word spring comes from. That's what springs are, right? If you go to many, many places in the world, there are natural springs where the water just comes out of the ground all year round, even when it's hot and dry, because the water was absorbed when it was raining, right? If you cut the forests, you're going to kill the springs, you're going to kill the base, those are called base flows in rivers. You're going to kill the ecosystem. So killing a forest could end up meaning no fish. It's really weird, right? But it's a fact, because all these things are connected together. That's the whole point of the word system in ecosystem. So when someone says, oh, I'm going to give you the rights, the property right, to cut the forest or whatever, the community or the auction buyer or the regulator may not take these things into account. But they should, because part of sustainability is not just harvest is going to be less than growth, but also you have to include negative externalities. Right? That's super important. When you're setting the harvest, you have to take into consideration the negative externalities.
So regarding deforestation, I think what the issue is, what they do is slash and burn.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a big issue. They hardly cut the tree, they just set it on fire and burn everything. So
Yeah, it's much more efficient. So so slash and burn is just so slash is so it's a combination of cutting the valuable trees, like teak, you're going to cut, or hardwood you want to cut and take out, and then you burn the rest, right? You can, or you can just burn everything if it's not very valuable, right? And then when you burn it, it leaves a lot of carbon on the ground. That carbon will feed the next crop or two of trees or cows or whatever until the soil is depleted. Most rainforests have very, very weak soil, terrible soil, right? It's very thin, and because most of the biomass in the rainforest is actually above the ground, it's in the trees. And if you remove the trees, there's nothing there, and in a couple of years it all goes away. So you're right, slash and burn is one way of doing it also. Okay, so then the last thing I'll mention, which is a very big deal on forests, is that also part of the biofuel discussion is that trees are a renewable resource, almost by definition, right? So in the EU they said, if you burn renewable fuels and if you generate energy with renewable fuels, wind, solar, biomass, it's considered renewable fuel. So if you actually convert your coal power plant to run on wood in Europe, that's considered to be a renewable fuel. But there's not enough wood in Europe to burn. So what they do is they actually import wood from the US as well as other countries. I know the Canadians have definitely looked into selling the pine beetle-killed wood. But you take the wood from the United States, ship it across the Atlantic into Germany or England, then they burn it with 0 carbon. What's the problem with this equation? Assuming that the wood is sustainably harvested. In the back, I'll ask you. What's the problem with this equation? Say that again? No, not exactly. That was the idea. It takes CO2 to grow the tree, and if you burn the tree, the CO2 goes back in the atmosphere. That is known as a fact, in a way. And they have nice filters and so on to reduce the pollution. Yeah. Transportation. Trees don't travel for free, right? So they're burning a whole bunch of diesel. Actually, even worse, there's a thing called bunker oil, which is the worst residual of oil refining. They take bunker oil, they ship it from Charlotte, wherever it is, or South Carolina. They take it to Europe and they burn their carbon-neutral tree, right? So it actually does create carbon compared to actually burning coal that comes from right next door in Poland or whatever. So it's not, again, it's not a free lunch. There's this CO2 stuff is a source of big scandals as far as biofuels are a source of big scandals in terms of environmental impacts. And it turns out, I don't know if it mismanages the resource when it comes down to chopping down forests. All right, I'll stop there. For Thursday, I'm going to go over the Gordon Scott essay.